The summer of 1985 had started like any other in the small town of Cedarville. The sun lingered lazily in the sky, casting long golden rays over the modest streets lined with maple trees, their leaves whispering in the warm breeze. Sarah Thompson, a woman of quiet composure but restless heart, stood in her kitchen, listening to the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator while preparing sandwiches for her daughter, Emily. 12-year-old Emily, a lively girl with chestnut hair that caught the sunlight in a halo-like glow, sat at the kitchen table, scribbling absent-mindedly into her notebook. "Mom, do you think I'll ever go somewhere exciting?" Emily asked, her green eyes wide with curiosity. She had always been the adventurous type, asking questions most children didn't think to ask, seeking mysteries where adults saw none. Sarah smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Life will take you places, Emily, but remember, adventures aren't just in far-off lands. They can be in the books you read, the people you meet, even in your own backyard." Emily grinned, her pencil flying across the paper. "I'm going to find one anyway," she said, a tone of quiet determination in her voice that would later echo hauntingly in Sarah's memory. That afternoon, Emily asked if she could ride her bike to the small park at the edge of town, a favorite spot where she often met her friends. Sarah, distracted by the humdrum of household chores, nodded with a smile, unaware that this ordinary gesture would mark the beginning of a nightmare she would carry for decades. "Be back before dinner," Sarah called as Emily pedaled down the street, the sound of her laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. The sight was familiar, comforting even, yet Sarah couldn't shake a fleeting unease. Mothers often felt these inexplicable nudges of premonition, but she pushed the feeling aside. Hours passed. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and amber. Sarah set the table, glancing repeatedly toward the window, expecting to see Emily's bike propped against the garage. Dinner came and went, yet Emily did not. Panic began to creep in like a shadow stretching its fingers over her chest. She called neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen the girl, but no one had. By nightfall, the small town's police force was involved. Officers canvassed the streets, questioned friends, and even contacted nearby towns. But Emily had vanished as though swallowed by the very air. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing. Days blurred into a haze of fear and grief. Sarah and her husband, James, scoured the town, plastered posters on every lamppost, and appeared on local radio, pleading for any information. Each day without Emily was a day suspended in agony. Sarah's nights became restless. She would lie awake imagining Emily calling out, trapped somewhere in shadows. James, stoic and practical, tried to maintain a sense of order, yet even he could not hide the cracks of despair etching themselves into his face. The town whispered. A missing child was a story that consumed small communities, and speculation grew like wildfire. Some said Emily had run away, tired of the strictures of her home. Others, more sinister, suggested the darker possibilities, a stranger, a hidden predator lurking nearby. Sarah refused to entertain such thoughts openly, but each hint, each whispered accusation, pierced her heart like a jagged blade. Weeks turned into months. Searches yielded nothing. The police files grew dusty and forgotten in cabinets, and life, cruelly, began to force itself back into routine. Sarah continued her job at the local library, a hollow shell of her former self, while James threw himself into work, desperate to suppress the gnawing emptiness. But every photograph of Emily, every birthday card and school project, became a time capsule of a life abruptly paused. One rainy evening, as Sarah sorted through Emily's belongings, a mountain of drawings, books, and childhood keepsakes, she stumbled upon a crumpled note tucked between the pages of a favorite storybook. It read in Emily's familiar handwriting, "Sometimes the world is bigger than it seems. Don't follow the noise. Listen to the quiet." At the time, it seemed like the musings of an imaginative child, a fragment of whimsical thought. But later, when the diary was discovered decades later, those words would take on an almost prophetic weight. As the years passed, Sarah and James faced the unbearable task of grieving while holding on to hope. Every new lead, every cold tip, and every anonymous phone call reignited the flame of expectation, only to be doused by disappointment. Emily became a ghost in their lives, present in memory but absent in reality. Sarah often found herself wandering through the quiet rooms of their home, pausing at Emily's empty bedroom, touching the walls that had once echoed with laughter, and whispering apologies into the still air. But deep inside, a part of Sarah refused to surrender completely. She could not entirely. Somewhere, buried beneath the fear, there remained a fragile ember of hope, a stubborn belief that the daughter she loved had left a clue, a message, a sign that would one day unravel the mystery. It was this ember that, unknowingly, would guide her toward the discovery of Emily's diary 25 years later, a diary that promised answers, but also, terrifyingly, secrets too profound to imagine. The years after Emily's disappearance stretched like an endless gray fog over the Thompson household. Each day was a struggle to maintain the illusion of normalcy, but beneath the surface Sarah felt as if time itself had fractured. Cedarville, once familiar and comforting, became a town that whispered of loss and suspicion. Neighbors who once smiled in passing now offered tight-lipped condolences or avoided the family entirely, unsure how to respond to grief that had no closure. Sarah threw herself into routines that felt hollow. She worked longer hours at the library, cataloging books and organizing stacks, hoping that the meticulous tasks could silence the thoughts gnawing at her mind. Yet every new volume she touched, stories of children, adventures, mysteries, reminded her of Emily. Even mundane objects around the house, the worn swing in the backyard, Emily's abandoned bicycle lying rusted by the garage, a half-finished puzzle on the dining table, became aching symbols of absence. James, stoic and practical by nature, buried himself in work, but the strain of the unsolved disappearance wore on him too. Arguments, once rare, became more frequent. He blamed Sarah at times for being too consumed by grief. She blamed him for being too consumed by anger. But beneath the cracks of tension was a shared unspoken despair. Neither could fully articulate the fear that Emily's absence had carved into their lives. Sarah tried to move forward in small ways. She joined support groups for parents of missing children, attending meetings in cold, sterile community centers. The stories she heard there were heartbreaking, each parent clutching the memory of a child who had vanished into thin air. She realized painfully that Emily was not alone in disappearance, but this knowledge did little to ease the personal agony she carried. Sometimes at night, she would whisper Emily's name into the darkness of her bedroom, half hoping, half fearing that an answer would come. The town itself seemed to age alongside her grief. Shops closed, streets emptied, new families moved in, and yet the shadow of Emily's disappearance lingered. Occasionally Sarah would run into a neighbor who remembered that fateful day, and their eyes would betray a mixture of guilt and awkward pity. She often wondered if people remembered Emily differently than she did, if her daughter was becoming just another face in the town's fading memories. Despite her attempts to cope, strange incidents continued to haunt her. Doors left slightly ajar, the faint sound of laughter echoing down empty hallways, and fleeting glimpses of someone small moving in the corner of her eye made her question her sanity. James dismissed these as tricks of the mind, a product of prolonged grief, but Sarah could not shake the feeling that Emily's presence lingered somewhere, just beyond reach. Time passed with the relentless rhythm of seasons. Birthdays came and went, holidays were muted by absence, and family gatherings were clouded with sorrow. Sarah would meticulously prepare Emily's favorite meals, set an extra place at the table, and light a candle in the girl's memory. Friends suggested letting go, moving on, but how could one move on when the answers remained locked away in silence? Even as the years blurred together, Sarah clung to fragments of hope. She kept Emily's room as it had been on the day she disappeared, a capsule of childhood frozen in time. Every photograph, every toy, every page of artwork was preserved with painstaking care. Each object was a reminder of what was lost, yes, but also of what could still be found. Sarah believed that Emily had left a part of herself behind, a message or clue that had yet to reveal itself. By 2010, 25 years had passed. Emily was no longer a child in Sarah's mind, but a young woman she had never seen grow up. The ache of absence had become a constant companion, a dull throb beneath the surface of daily life. Sarah had moved homes once, trying to escape the stares of townspeople and memories that lurked in every corner. Yet no matter where she went, the pain remained. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake in silence, listening to the creaks of the house, and imagining Emily's voice calling softly in the dark. It was during one of these restless nights, as Sarah was sorting through old boxes in the attic of their new home, that she stumbled upon a familiar forgotten object, Emily's diary. The leather cover was worn, edges frayed, but the pages inside seemed untouched by time. At first glance, it appeared to be ordinary, a collection of childish musings, drawings, and school notes. But as Sarah flipped through the pages, she noticed a subtle shift in Emily's writing, hints of observation, reflection, and occasionally, cryptic sentences that didn't make sense to anyone but a mind trying to conceal something. Sarah's heart raced. The diary had been a relic of the past, long thought lost in the chaos of Emily's disappearance. Now it sat in her hands, a tangible connection to the daughter she had not seen in a quarter-century. She could feel Emily's presence in every line, every carefully chosen word, as though the girl had known her mother would one day need guidance through the shadows of the unknown. The diary became Sarah's obsession. She read it late into the night, often losing track of time and ignoring the world outside her small attic sanctuary. The ordinary entries, descriptions of school, friends, and summer adventures, soon gave way to more puzzling content. Cryptic phrases, hidden dates, and symbols whose meanings were unclear. Sarah began to sense that Emily had left behind more than memories. She had left clues, warnings, or perhaps even a trail leading to the truth of her disappearance. For the first time in 25 years, a flicker of hope ignited in Sarah's heart. The life she had paused, the grief she had carried as a constant burden, suddenly seemed to have direction. Emily had spoken to her across time, through fragile pages, and Sarah vowed she would follow wherever those words might lead. Whatever secrets lay buried, she would uncover them, and so life on hold began to shift. The past was no longer just a memory. It had become a puzzle, and Sarah was determined to piece it together. Every night she read, every note she deciphered. She felt closer to Emily. The diary was not just a book, it was a map, a beacon, and perhaps the only path toward understanding the truth that had eluded her for so long. The attic was a room Sarah had avoided for years. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the small window, settling on boxes stacked haphazardly, remnants of lives long past. She had climbed the creaky wooden stairs that afternoon on a whim, driven by a mix of nostalgia and restless energy that had been building for weeks. There was no particular reason, no memory calling her there, but as her fingers traced the edges of the boxes, a shiver ran down her spine, as though the house itself were whispering secrets she had long ignored. At the very top of one stack, tucked between a faded shoebox and a bundle of old school papers, she found it, Emily's diary. The leather cover, once soft and supple, was now cracked with age, edges fraying, but it carried a faint, familiar scent. Emily's scent, in some intangible way preserved by time. Heart-hammering, Sarah lifted the diary with trembling hands, feeling a surge of emotion that she had long suppressed. Here was a piece of her daughter, untouched by the years, waiting silently to be discovered. Sitting cross-legged on the attic floor, Sarah opened the diary and ran her fingers over the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable, Emily's careful, rounded letters, the same handwriting she had adored decades ago. At first the entries seemed simple, almost mundane. Notes about friends, school projects, summer adventures. There were drawings of flowers, stick figures, and little doodles in the margins. But as Sarah read further, she noticed subtle changes in the tone, shifts that hinted at a depth she had never imagined Emily capable of at such a young age. There were passages that spoke of things Emily saw but didn't fully understand, strange faces in the crowd, whispers that seemed out of place, and a sense of being watched. Some sentences were cryptic. "The shadow moves when no one is looking," she wrote on one page. On another, "I hear things at night, but I cannot tell." At first, Sarah tried to dismiss these as childish imaginings, the fanciful musings of a 12-year-old girl with an active imagination. But a nagging unease began to creep over her. Emily had always been perceptive, far more so than most children her age. Could it be that these were warnings written with a clarity Sarah had overlooked? Over the next few weeks, the diary consumed Sarah's waking hours. She carried it everywhere, reading between tasks, at the kitchen table, late at night when the house was silent. Each page seemed to speak to her, urging her to look closer, to question what had been forgotten. There were repeated references to people Emily had encountered, neighbors, teachers, even strangers, described in a way that suggested more than innocent observation. Some names were crossed out, others circled, underlined as though emphasizing a hidden significance. One night, as rain pelted against the attic window, Sarah found a folded note tucked into a secret pocket at the back of the diary. It was small, barely larger than a postage stamp, and written in Emily's tiny handwriting. "If I disappear, look where I left the pieces." The words were cryptic, almost like a puzzle. Sarah's heart raced. Pieces of what? Of a secret? Of a story? Of Emily herself? The note felt like a message across time, a plea from her daughter to understand what had been happening before her disappearance. Obsessed and sleepless, Sarah began to catalog the diary in painstaking detail. She transcribed passages, created notes, and compared dates and events. There were references to places she had never heard Emily mention: a small park on the outskirts of town, a field behind an abandoned warehouse, and a path leading into the woods that bordered Cedarville. Each location, she realized, held significance, as if Emily had mapped her own world, hiding clues in plain sight. The diary also hinted at relationships that had been hidden from Sarah, interactions Emily had experienced but never spoken of: a girl from school who always seemed sad, a man who smelled of smoke and asked too many questions, a neighbor who left when the sun went down. Sarah felt the cold grip of fear tighten around her chest. Could these cryptic entries point to something dangerous? Something that Emily had tried to warn her about? Days turned into weeks as Sarah pored over every detail. She began to notice patterns, repetitions in Emily's phrasing, symbols she initially thought were doodles but now seemed deliberate. Circles around letters, tiny arrows pointing to margins, underlined words like watch, hidden, and safe. She began to suspect that Emily had been trying to leave a trail, a roadmap of sorts, for someone to follow. A roadmap only a mother, or someone who knew her intimately, could decipher. Sarah's nights became haunted by the diary's contents. Dreams blurred with reality. She would awaken thinking Emily was calling her, or see fleeting shadows in the corner of her room. At times she wondered if the diary itself was alive, a vessel through which her daughter reached across decades. Friends and family noticed the change in Sarah, her obsession, her intensity, but she could not explain why the diary mattered so profoundly. Not to them, not yet. As the initial shock of discovery faded, a sense of purpose replaced the numb grief that had dominated her life for 25 years. Sarah realized that the diary was more than a collection of memories. It was a key, a guide, and perhaps the only path to uncovering the truth about Emily's disappearance. She knew, deep in her bones, that the journey ahead would be painful, that the secrets contained within those pages would challenge everything she thought she knew. Yet she also knew she could not ignore it. She could not stop now. Emily had left her a message, and Sarah was determined to follow it, no matter where it led. Sarah had expected the diary to be a comfort, a tangible connection to her lost daughter, but what she discovered instead was a labyrinth. Each page seemed simple at first glance, yet beneath Emily's neat handwriting, a network of codes, hidden messages, and subtle clues waited to be deciphered. Sarah spent hours hunched over the diary, magnifying glass in hand, cross-referencing dates, names, and symbols. It was as if Emily had left a secret language, one that only a devoted mother could hope to understand. The first thing Sarah noticed were the odd symbols scattered throughout the pages. Small triangles, circles, and arrows appeared beside certain words or phrases, often pointing to a margin or another page entirely. Sometimes letters were circled or written in a darker ink, forming combinations that initially seemed meaningless. But patterns emerged. Words repeated themselves across weeks of entries, sometimes in different contexts, as though Emily were emphasizing certain points she could not explain in plain language. One entry made Sarah pause. Emily had written about a man in the gray coat who appeared near the park where she often played. She described him in passing, his height, his quiet demeanor, the way he would linger near the swings without ever approaching. Sarah had always assumed Emily's imagination was at work, perhaps inspired by stories or movies she had seen. But the way Emily circled certain letters in the description, M-A-N-G-R-Y, made Sarah shiver. The letters, when rearranged, spelled a warning, Angry man. Another set of entries hinted at places Emily frequented alone. Beneath drawings of trees in the park, small arrows led to marginal notes. Behind the oak, under the bridge, by the fence where no one comes. Sarah realized Emily had been leaving physical clues about locations she considered safe or unsafe. These were not mere reflections. They were directions, perhaps a map, perhaps instructions. Sarah felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Emily had been leaving her breadcrumbs, tiny signals meant to be discovered someday. The diary also contained coded references to people. A teacher, a neighbor, a friend, each described with peculiar phrases that Sarah had overlooked in the past. There was a cryptic entry about Mrs. H with the red scarf, always watching, and another about the boy with the broken watch. Don't trust. At first, these seemed like typical childhood observations. But the way Emily underlined certain letters in her descriptions hinted at something more. Initials, perhaps, or a hidden message. Sarah began to map out these references, creating charts and lists, convinced that Emily had left a key to understanding the danger she faced. Some entries were even darker. Emily wrote of hearing whispers at night, of shadows moving when no one was around, of feeling that someone followed her. Sarah could feel the fear radiating from the pages. These were not the harmless imaginings of a child. They were the careful recording of events she sensed, but could not fully confront. And then there were the repeated phrases, "If I disappear, find the pieces. Do not trust the silence, and follow the marks. But be careful." Sarah realized that Emily had known something bad was coming, something she could not explain but had prepared for in secret. Sarah's obsession deepened. She began spending entire days and nights decoding the diary, comparing it with old photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings from 1985. She noticed that Emily had referenced dates in strange ways, writing them backward or adding subtle marks that suggested something significant had happened on those days. One such entry described a Sunday afternoon. "The wind changed at 3. I watched him leave the corner. He will come again." When Sarah cross-referenced her memory and the old police reports, she discovered an unsolved tip from that exact date. A man in a gray coat had been seen near the park, lingering suspiciously, yet no one had followed up. Emily had documented danger that authorities had ignored. The deeper Sarah delved, the more she realized that the diary was not only a record of Emily's thoughts, it was a warning, a guide and a testament to her daughter's intelligence and courage. Each symbol, each underline, each cryptic sentence was deliberate, a silent plea to be found and understood. It was as if Emily had known that Sarah, after 25 years, would be the one to follow the trail she had left. Sarah's research began to reveal a network of clues linking people, places, and events. Letters and names that had seemed unimportant in 1985 suddenly gained meaning. She discovered subtle references to a hidden location, something Emily had hinted at as the safe place, yet never fully described. There were instructions embedded in drawings, arrows pointing to corners of pages, and words that, when rearranged, spelled out warnings and guidance. Sarah felt her pulse quicken each time she uncovered a new connection, but with each discovery came fear. If Emily had left messages warning of danger, then the threat that had stalked her daughter might still exist, or worse, someone had known exactly what had happened all those years ago. Sarah realized that uncovering the truth would not only bring answers but also expose the dark reality that had been hidden behind the cheerful facade of Cedarville. The diary had become more than a book. It was a living puzzle. Every night, Sarah would sit under the attic's dim light, magnifying glass and notebook in hand, translating Emily's codes and mapping her patterns. She began to feel Emily's presence with her, guiding her, nudging her toward the next hidden message. The lines between past and present blurred. Sarah knew that the truth was close, that every symbol, every arrow, every circle had a purpose. For the first time in 25 years, Sarah felt she was not chasing a ghost, but following a trail deliberately left by the daughter she had loved and lost. And somewhere in those pages, she realized, lay the answers she had been waiting for all her life. The secrets Emily had embedded in the diary were not just words. They were a key to uncovering the fate of a child, and perhaps the resolution of a grief that had lasted a quarter of a century. The diary had changed everything. For the first time in 25 years, Sarah felt a sense of direction, as though Emily herself were leading her through a trail she had carefully left behind. The quiet despair that had defined her life was replaced by determination. She could no longer wait passively for answers. If Emily had left these clues, then it was Sarah's duty to follow them, to uncover the truth and perhaps bring closure to a nightmare that had haunted every corner of her existence. Sarah began by revisiting the people Emily had mentioned in her diary. She called old neighbors, former classmates, teachers, anyone who might remember events from 1985. Some were skeptical. Some had vague memories, and some refused to speak at all, reluctant to reopen a painful chapter. But a few offered fragments of information. Tiny details Emily had noted in her cryptic way. A man lingering near the park, a neighbor who acted oddly during summer days, a teacher who seemed too curious about certain children. Each fragment became a piece of the puzzle, connecting the past with the present. The diary also pointed to locations, places Emily had marked as safe, or dangerous or significant in ways Sarah could not yet fully comprehend. She retraced Emily's old routes, the park, the playground, the field behind the abandoned warehouse, even the overgrown path leading into the woods. Some areas had changed beyond recognition, but Sarah relied on the diary's meticulous directions, trees, fences, and old landmarks that Emily had drawn in sketches. She began mapping these locations carefully, cross-referencing them with the timeline of her daughter's last known movements. One evening, as Sarah examined a field overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, she found something that made her heart lurch. Beneath the brambles was a small, weathered box, partially buried. Inside were items that had belonged to Emily, a bracelet, a drawing, and a folded piece of paper covered in her neat, small handwriting. The note read, "Follow the river. Don't go alone. Watch the shadows." Sarah shivered. Emily had left her instructions, warnings about a danger Sarah could barely comprehend. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Driven by the diary, Sarah expanded her search, contacting former friends of Emily's who had scattered across the country. Some had grown into adults with lives of their own. Some carried the same pain of having lost a childhood friend. They provided hints that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Emily had been observant, had noticed things adults ignored, and had even tried to tell someone, through subtle notes or drawings, that something was wrong. No one had fully understood at the time. Now, decades later, these fragments were beginning to form a coherent picture. Sarah's obsession intensified. She spent long nights in the attic, tracing connections between people, places, and events. Newspaper clippings from 1985, old photographs, and Emily's notes merged into a tangled web. She began noticing a recurring figure in Emily's entries, a man described only by subtle traits, gray coat, tall, quiet. There were no names, but the diary hinted that he had been lurking around Emily's life in ways no one had questioned at the time. Sarah realized with mounting horror that this figure might have played a direct role in her daughter's disappearance. The deeper Sarah delved, the more dangerous her pursuit became. She encountered hostility and suspicion from those who remembered the past differently, from people who seemed eager to keep secrets buried. One former neighbor, evasive and nervous during a conversation, hinted that Emily had seen something she shouldn't have. Another, a distant relative, abruptly ended a call after Sarah asked about an old photograph. The diary's warnings now felt like urgent commands. Watch the shadows. Do not trust silence. Sarah understood that she was uncovering truths some wanted to remain hidden. Despite the fear, Sarah pressed on. Each clue she followed brought her closer to understanding Emily's final days. She realized that her daughter had not been careless or naive. Emily had been proactive, documenting details, leaving signs, and mapping dangers she sensed. Every arrow, every circled letter, every coded phrase was a testament to her intelligence and courage. Sarah felt both pride and guilt. Pride at Emily's foresight, guilt at not seeing the warning signs herself. The search began to attract attention. Police records were revisited, cold cases reopened, and experts consulted to decode Emily's notes and sketches. Sarah worked tirelessly, driven by a singular purpose: to reconstruct the events that had led to her daughter's disappearance and to identify anyone involved. The diary had transformed from a personal relic into a roadmap of revelation, guiding Sarah through a maze of hidden truths. At times, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She would collapse into bed after days of retracing Emily's steps, deciphering codes, and speaking to reluctant witnesses. Yet even in moments of fatigue, she could feel Emily's presence in the diary, urging her forward, reminding her that the journey had a purpose. Each discovery, no matter how small, reinforced the possibility that Emily's fate was not beyond reach. Then one late evening, Sarah noticed a series of markings in the diary she had previously overlooked, faint scratches on the margins that, when aligned across multiple pages, formed a symbol. It resembled a key, or perhaps a lock. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Emily had been hiding something tangible, something that could unlock the final answers. Sarah's pulse quickened. The pieces were coming together, and the path forward was becoming clearer, yet fraught with danger. For the first time since 1985, Sarah felt the full weight of possibility. She was not merely chasing memories or grappling with grief. She was on the brink of uncovering a secret so profound, so carefully hidden, that it had remained undiscovered for a quarter century. And she knew that the next steps, guided by Emily's diary, driven by maternal resolve, would lead her to the ultimate truth, the revelation of what had truly happened to her daughter, and the identity of those who had concealed it for so long. The pieces that had once seemed disconnected began to converge into a terrifying clarity. Sarah could see the outline of events that had led to Emily's disappearance, woven together across the pages of the diary and the testimonies of people who had finally spoken after decades of silence. What had been an unanswerable question for 25 years now had threads that could be traced, paths that could be followed, and names that could be spoken aloud. It started with the man in the gray coat, the figure Emily had described repeatedly in her writings. As Sarah dug through old police reports and photographs, she identified him, Harold Kinsley, a drifter who had lived on the outskirts of Cedarville for a brief period in 1985. He had been known locally for his unsettling behavior around children, though he was never formally charged. The diary's coded entries, arrows, circled letters, underlined warnings, all pointed to encounters with him. Emily had observed him carefully, documented him meticulously, and now, decades later, Sarah realized the depth of the danger her daughter had faced. But Harold Kinsley was not acting alone. Hidden relationships began to emerge. People who had ignored Emily's warnings, who had colluded in silence, whether out of fear, greed, or indifference. Sarah learned that a neighbor, who had seemed kind at the time, had been a silent witness to Kinsley's movements. The neighbor had noticed strange activities. Children left unattended near him, but chose to look away. Emily, perceptive as ever, had recorded cryptic messages about these individuals, knowing they might never act unless someone pieced together the clues. The diary revealed more than danger. It revealed Emily's courage. She had known how to protect herself, leaving subtle messages, marking safe paths, and warning against trust. Sarah felt an overwhelming mix of pride and grief. Her daughter had been trapped in circumstances beyond her control, yet she had tried to fight, to guide, to survive in ways Sarah could now appreciate fully. Each coded phrase and underlined word reflected a child forced to navigate peril, and each revelation carved deeper into Sarah's heart. As the investigation advanced, Sarah traced physical locations described in Emily's diary, behind an abandoned warehouse, overgrown fields, and forgotten footpaths. She uncovered hidden evidence, scraps of clothing, small personal items, and notes that Emily had left in places she considered temporary refuges. It became clear that Emily had been attempting to leave clues in case she vanished, preparing a trail for someone who cared enough to look. Sarah followed each marker meticulously, sometimes trembling at the thought that she was retracing a child's final steps into danger. The breakthrough came when Sarah located a hidden compartment in the warehouse Emily had drawn in the diary. Inside were photographs and personal objects that had never been discovered by the authorities. Among them was a letter written by Emily, addressed vaguely to her mother. "I am not safe. They are watching. Find the pieces. They will try to stop you, but you must continue." The realization struck Sarah with a cold force. Emily had been aware of her captors, of those who had taken her from the normal world of childhood and had tried to communicate a path to survival. Further investigation revealed that Emily had been taken by Kinsley, but local complicity and fear had kept her plight concealed. Some individuals had actively covered for him, manipulating circumstances to ensure that no trail led back to them. The diary had documented this network subtly, leaving hints for a future discovery. Sarah felt rage boil within her, anger at the injustice, at the betrayal, at the decades of silence. But alongside that fury was a resolute determination to see justice done, even if it could never undo the past. The revelation of Emily's fate was both horrifying and illuminating. She had survived parts of her disappearance, using intelligence and cunning to evade full capture. The diary chronicled the ways she had resisted and hidden, but it also made clear the psychological toll such a life had taken on a child. Every coded warning, every cryptic entry, was a testament to her resilience and foresight. Sarah understood with a mixture of awe and grief that Emily had been extraordinarily brave, leaving a trail of survival for someone devoted enough to follow it. As the final pieces came together, Sarah confronted the individuals who had been complicit in covering up the truth. The confrontation was tense, uncomfortable, and fraught with emotion. Some admitted partial knowledge, others denied everything until confronted with evidence directly from Emily's diary. It became clear that fear, greed, and self-preservation had kept a network of people silent, allowing Emily's disappearance to remain unresolved for decades. But Sarah had the diary, and through it, the truth could no longer be hidden. She had followed her daughter's carefully plotted breadcrumbs, unlocking secrets that had eluded investigators, family, and community alike. In doing so, she had reclaimed Emily's story, giving voice to the courage and intelligence her daughter had shown even in the face of unimaginable peril. By the end of the investigation, the picture was complete. Sarah understood exactly what had happened, who had been involved, and the methods Emily had used to survive and leave a trace for her mother. The diary had been more than a record. It had been a lifeline. And in discovering the truth, Sarah felt both closure and a profound sorrow. A recognition that while she had found the answers, the years lost could never be returned. Yet within the sorrow, there was also pride and love. Emily's intelligence, her bravery, and her determination had guided Sarah across time. Through coded messages, hidden clues, and subtle warnings, Emily had communicated a story that had been waiting to be understood. And now, finally, Sarah could honor that story, bringing light to decades of darkness and giving voice to the daughter she had lost but never forgotten. The moment Sarah finally understood the full scope of Emily's disappearance was both relieving and devastating. Relief came from knowing the truth, finally seeing the pattern Emily had left behind, and understanding the danger her daughter had endured. Devastation came from the realization of how much time had been lost, how many years of hope and fear had been suspended in uncertainty, and how many lives had been affected by the lies and silences that surrounded Emily's disappearance. Armed with the diary, the hidden clues and corroborating testimonies, Sarah approached the authorities once more. This time, the evidence was undeniable. Police reopened the case, not as a cold investigation, but as a carefully constructed path guided by the diary itself. Emily's coded messages, the photographs, the hidden notes, all became the cornerstone of a new inquiry. Individuals who had evaded responsibility for decades were confronted, and slowly, the intricate web of complicity began to unravel. Some confessed, some resisted, but all were forced to face the truth that could no longer remain buried. The town of Cedarville reacted in waves. Shock rippled through the streets as neighbors realized the depth of what had been concealed. Whispers and speculation shifted into a tense acknowledgement of reality. Emily's disappearance had been neither random nor simple. It had been entwined with fear, secrecy, and betrayal. Some residents expressed guilt, others relief that the mystery was finally being resolved. Sarah, despite the turmoil, felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the truth emerge, even if it came at a cost to the town's collective conscience. Sarah's life, once frozen in the agony of loss, began to reshape itself around understanding. The diary became a symbol, not of sorrow alone, but of resilience, intelligence, and the enduring bond between mother and daughter. She organized the diary carefully, preserving every note, every sketch, and every coded message. She also documented her investigation, ensuring that Emily's story could never be dismissed or forgotten again. It was a legacy of courage, one that would outlive the pain and silence that had dominated the preceding decades. There were moments of private reflection that brought both joy and grief. Sarah would sit in Emily's old room, now slightly repurposed for daily life but still imbued with her presence. She ran her fingers across Emily's favorite chair, her drawings pinned carefully on the walls, and spoke softly to the space, as if her daughter could hear her. In these moments she felt a connection more profound than words could express, a sense that Emily, in some way, had always been near, guiding her toward the truth even across the gulf of time. The revelations brought closure, but not without consequences. Some individuals faced legal repercussions, others social shame, and a few were forced to confront the moral failures that had allowed the disappearance to remain unsolved for so long. Sarah understood that justice could not undo the past, nor fully heal the wounds of decades, but it could acknowledge the truth and honor Emily's bravery. For her, that acknowledgement was essential. In the wake of the investigation, Sarah became an advocate for missing children and the importance of listening to those who try to warn us. She spoke publicly about Emily's diary, the messages hidden within, and the courage of a child who had fought to communicate across time. The story resonated widely, inspiring others to pay attention to subtle signs and to never dismiss a child's intuition. Sarah found purpose in transforming her grief into action, ensuring that Emily's legacy helped prevent future tragedies. At home, life slowly regained a rhythm. There were still moments of sadness, echoes of unanswered questions, and the ache of years lost, but they were tempered by a sense of accomplishment and understanding. Sarah maintained the diary as a sacred object, a testament to Emily's mind, heart, and spirit. She began to share its lessons with those who would listen, turning personal pain into collective awareness. In doing so, she honored Emily in a way that transcended loss, a way that allowed her daughter's voice to continue to guide, even in absence. As the sun set over Cedarville, Sarah walked through the overgrown fields where she had once followed Emily's clues. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment she imagined the laughter of a young girl echoing softly around her. She smiled, feeling both grief and joy, sorrow and pride. Emily had endured, she had fought, and through the diary, she had spoken across time to ensure that the truth would not be lost. Sarah realized that closure did not mean forgetting or moving on. It meant understanding, honoring, and carrying forward the lessons of love, resilience, and vigilance. The diary, once a forgotten relic, had become a beacon. It had allowed a mother to reclaim her daughter's story, to confront the darkness that had lurked unnoticed, and to illuminate a path that could save others. And in that light, Sarah found a sense of peace, knowing that Emily's courage had finally been recognized, her story finally told, and her voice eternally preserved.